Olivia's heart raced as she walked toward her boss's office. The glass walls made James Wilson visible to everyone, but no one could hear what happened inside those walls. His intense focus on the computer screen didn't waver as she knocked softly on the door. "Come in," he said without looking up. She entered, smoothing her pencil skirt nervously. James finally raised his eyes. Those deep blue eyes always made her stomach flutter, though she tried hard to ignore it. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Wilson?" she asked, standing with her notepad ready. James leaned back in his leather chair. His broad shoulders stretched his expensive suit in a way that Olivia tried not to notice. "Sit down, Olivia. And please, how many times must I ask you to call me James when we're alone?" She sat, crossing her legs. "Sorry, James." The word felt intimate on her tongue. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. "I need something from you. Something unusual." Olivia tensed. In the 2 years she'd worked as the marketing executive under him, James had always been professional. Demanding, yes. Difficult, sometimes, but never inappropriate. "I need you to be my date this Saturday night." The words hung in the air between them. Olivia blinked, certain she had misheard. "Your date?" James turned to face her, his expression serious. "The Morrison account dinner. It's crucial for the company. The investors will be there with their wives. And," he hesitated, running a hand through his dark hair, "my ex will be there too. With her new boyfriend." Understanding dawned on Olivia. "This is about your pride. This is about the company image," he corrected her quickly. "Too quickly. I can't show up alone. Not after Vanessa made such a public scene when she left me." Olivia remembered the gossip that had circulated 3 months ago. The CEO's fiancé leaving him for another man had been the talk of the office for weeks. "Surely there are other women you could ask," Olivia said carefully. James stepped closer, the scent of his cologne making her pulse quicken. "I need someone intelligent, someone who understands business, someone who won't embarrass me in front of the Morrisons. So I'm convenient," she said, a hint of challenge in her voice. A smile played at the corner of his mouth. "You're perfect." The word sent a dangerous warmth through her body. "It's just one night, Olivia. A business arrangement. I'll pay for a new dress, of course." She stood up, suddenly feeling the need to be on equal footing. "And if I say no?" His eyes flickered with something she couldn't read. "Then I respect your decision, but I hope you'll say yes. The future of this company might depend on it." Olivia knew she should refuse. Office rumors already suggested she was too close to the boss. This would only make things worse. But something in his eyes, was it vulnerability, made her hesitate. "Just dinner? Just business?" she asked. "Of course," he replied, though his gaze lingered on her lips a second too long. "I'll need to leave by 11, she added, already giving in. Relief spread across his face. "Perfect, I'll send a car for you at 7. He reached out and touched her arm lightly. "Thank you, Olivia. I won't forget this." She nodded and turned to leave, but his voice stopped her at the door. "Wear something blue. It brings out your eyes." Olivia felt her cheeks warm as she walked back to her desk. Just business, she reminded herself. But the flutter in her stomach suggested something else entirely. That night she stood in front of her closet, phone in hand as she texted her roommate. "My boss demanded a date with me. And God help me, I said yes." Olivia spent the entire weekend in a state of nervous energy. She visited 3 different stores before finding a dress that satisfied her. It was midnight blue, fitted at the top with a flowing skirt that ended just above her knees. Not too formal, not too casual, and definitely not too sexy, though it hugged her curves in ways she couldn't ignore. "You're overthinking this," Kate said, sprawled on Olivia's bed watching the fashion show. "It's just a work thing." Olivia turned sideways in the mirror. "Then why did he specifically ask me to wear blue?" Kate raised an eyebrow. "Because he's noticed your eyes? That's not exactly innocent boss behavior." "It doesn't mean anything," Olivia insisted, though her cheeks warmed at the thought. Her phone buzzed with a message. James again. "The Morrisons are big wine collectors. Brush up on California vineyards if you can." It was the 5th text since yesterday. Each one revealed another detail about the dinner, the guests, or what James needed from her. But this one was followed by another message. "By the way, how are you with dancing? There might be some after dinner." Olivia's stomach tightened. Dancing meant touching. She typed back, "I can manage. Nothing too fancy though." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then reappeared. Finally, "I'll lead, you'll be fine." The thought of his hand on her waist made her pulse quicken. She put the phone down. "You're blushing," Kate noted. What did Mr. Demanding say now? Nothing. Olivia lied, turning back to the mirror. Saturday arrived too quickly. Olivia spent an hour on her hair and makeup, aiming for elegant but not trying too hard. At exactly 7, her doorbell rang. She expected a driver, but when she opened the door, James himself stood there. His eyes widened slightly as they traveled from her face down the length of her dress. "You look," he started, then cleared his throat. "The blue is perfect." In his tailored black suit and crisp white shirt, he looked even more handsome than he did at the office. His cologne enveloped her as she locked her door. "The car's waiting," he said, placing his hand lightly on the small of her back as they walked outside. The touch sent warmth spreading across her skin. This was going to be harder than she thought. Inside the luxury car, James briefed her on the evening ahead. "Vanessa will try to make me jealous. Don't let it bother you." "Why would it bother me?" Olivia asked. His eyes met hers in the dim light. "Because I need you to act like it would. Like we're together." "How together?" she asked, her voice quieter than intended. James looked away. "Nothing inappropriate. Just comfortable with each other. Familiar." "Familiar," she repeated, the word heavy between them. He reached over and took her hand. His thumb brushed over her knuckles, sending a shiver up her arm. "Like this. Is this okay?" Olivia nodded, not trusting her voice. It was just acting, she reminded herself. They arrived at an elegant restaurant overlooking the city. Before they entered, James leaned close to her ear. "Remember, tonight you're not my employee. You're the woman I can't take my eyes off." His breath was warm against her neck, and Olivia felt dizzy with his closeness. Inside, he kept his hand on her back, guiding her through the crowded restaurant. When they reached the private dining room, a tall blonde woman immediately locked eyes with them. Her face tightened as she took in Olivia's appearance. "That's her," James whispered. Without thinking, Olivia leaned into him, her body pressing against his side. She felt his arm tighten around her waist in response. "James," the blonde woman approached, a thin smile on her perfect lips. "I didn't expect you to bring anyone." "Vanessa," he nodded coolly. "This is Olivia." Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "And how did you two meet?" Before James could answer, Olivia smiled and placed her hand on his chest. "Let's just say he can be very persuasive when he wants something." James looked down at her with surprise and something else, something that made her heart race and her body warm. This was definitely not just business anymore. Vanessa's smile did not reach her eyes as she looked between them. "Well, aren't you too cozy? James never mentioned you at our last charity board meeting. It's still new," James said smoothly, his arm still firm around Olivia's waist. "But when you know, you know." Olivia nearly choked on her breath. He was taking this act seriously. "The Morrisons are waiting," James added, nodding politely before guiding Olivia away. "That was a bit much," Olivia whispered once they were out of earshot. His lips curved slightly. "You started it with that persuasive comment." She felt her cheeks warm. "I was improvising." "Keep improvising," he murmured close to her ear. "The Morrisons are watching." Mr. and Mrs. Morrison were an older couple with kind eyes that assessed Olivia carefully as James introduced her. 2 other couples joined them at the large round table, all important investors according to James's briefing. Vanessa and her date sat directly across from them, her eyes constantly drifting to James and Olivia. Under the table, James's hand found Olivia's knee. She nearly jumped at the contact. "Relax," he whispered, barely moving his lips as he reached for his water glass with his other hand. The dinner progressed with business talk that Olivia followed easily, occasionally adding insights that made the investors nod with approval. James seemed genuinely impressed, his hand giving her knee a gentle squeeze whenever she made a good point. "How did you two meet?" Mrs. Morrison eventually asked, looking between them with curiosity. Vanessa leaned forward slightly, obviously interested in the answer. James glanced at Olivia, a silent challenge in his eyes. She took a sip of wine for courage. "We worked together first," she began truthfully. "I thought he was the most irritating man I'd ever met." The table laughed, James included, though his eyes narrowed playfully. He was demanding and patient, she continued. I prefer focused and efficient, James cut in, his fingers now tracing small circles on her knee under the table. The touch was distracting, making it hard to remember this was all pretend. And then? Mrs. Morrison prompted. Olivia looked at James, suddenly lost for words as his blue eyes held hers. And then, he took over. I watched her give a presentation to clients that blew everyone away. Suddenly, I wasn't seeing my colleague anymore. I was seeing this brilliant, beautiful woman who challenged me in ways no one else dared to. His voice had dropped lower, more intimate. The table had gone quiet, everyone captivated by the story. But Olivia barely noticed them. James was looking at her as if the story were true, as if she really had captivated him. It just took me a while to do something about it, he finished, his hand moving slightly higher on her thigh, thumb brushing back and forth in a hypnotic rhythm. Olivia swallowed hard. He finally asked me out, though asked might be generous. It was more like a business proposal. The table laughed again, breaking the tension. But the heat of James's hand remained, burning through the fabric of her dress. After dinner, the soft sounds of music drifted in from the main restaurant. Dance with me, James said, standing and offering his hand. It wasn't a question. On the small dance floor, he pulled her close, one hand on her lower back, the other holding hers against his chest. They moved together as if they had done this many times before. You're good at this, she murmured. Dancing or pretending to want you? He asked, his breath warm against her hair. The question hung between them. Olivia pulled back slightly to look at his face. Which is it? Something shifted in his expression. His eyes dropped to her lips, lingered there. Olivia. The music changed to something faster, and other couples joined the floor. The moment broke as they had to adjust their steps. But as they danced, his hold on her only tightened, and when Vanessa walked by with her date, James dipped his head and pressed his lips to Olivia's neck, just below her ear. Sorry, he whispered, but his voice didn't sound sorry at all. She was watching. Olivia could barely breathe. Is she still watching? His lips brushed higher, closer to her ear. I don't care. And in that moment, neither did she. Monday morning came too quickly. Olivia stood in the elevator, her stomach tight with nerves. Saturday night had ended with a quiet car ride home, James walking her to her door, and a moment where they both hesitated, the air between them heavy with something unspoken. In the end, he had simply squeezed her hand and thanked her for a successful evening. The Morrisons had agreed to the deal. But what about everything else? The touches, the looks, his lips on her neck. The elevator doors opened to her floor, and she took a deep breath before stepping out. James was already in his office, visible through the glass walls. He looked up as she walked by, his face returning to the cool, professional mask she knew so well. He nodded briefly before returning to his call. Olivia's heart sank a little. So that was how it would be. Back to normal, as if Saturday had never happened. She buried herself in work, trying to ignore the ache of disappointment. Around noon, her phone buzzed with a text. Meeting in my office, 5 p.m. No please, no explanation, just James being James, demanding as always. The day dragged on. At 5 sharp, she knocked on his door. Come in, he called, not looking up from his computer. The scene was so similar to Friday that it felt like déjà vu. Olivia took the seat across from his desk, notepad ready. You wanted to see me? He finally looked up, his blue eyes unreadable. The Miller proposal needs to be redone. Their specifications changed this morning. Her shoulders dropped slightly. All business then. I'll get started on it tomorrow. We need it by Wednesday morning. Olivia stiffened. That's impossible. The original took 2 weeks. That's why we'll be working late, tonight and tomorrow. His tone left no room for argument. I have plans tonight, she lied, suddenly wanting to push back, to see if she could crack his professional exterior. A flash of something, annoyance, disappointment, crossed his face. Cancel them. This is priority. Olivia wanted to refuse, to remind him that he didn't own her time outside of work hours, but the company needed the Miller account, and deep down, she was curious. Would being alone with him reveal anything about what had happened between them? Fine, she agreed reluctantly. They worked in his office until 9, ordering takeout that they ate while reviewing design mock-ups. James kept his distance, all business except for the occasional moment when their hands would brush as they reached for the same document, or when he would look at her a second too long. By the time they finished for the night, Olivia was exhausted and confused. As she gathered her things to leave, James finally broke the professional wall between them. "You were amazing Saturday night," he said quietly. "The Morrisons couldn't stop talking about you." Olivia paused. "Just doing what you asked." He stepped closer. "Were you? All of it?" Her breath caught as he moved into her space. "What do you mean?" "The way you looked at me during dinner. The way you fit against me when we danced." His voice had dropped lower, sending shivers down her spine. "Was that all just a good performance?" Olivia's heart raced. "You were pretty convincing yourself." "I wasn't acting, Olivia." The words hung between them, changing everything. "You're my boss," she whispered, the only defense she could muster as he moved closer still. "Right now, I'm just a man who hasn't been able to stop thinking about you." His hand reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face, fingers lingering against her cheek. Olivia knew she should step back. This was exactly the complication she had feared, but her body betrayed her, leaning slightly into his touch. "We can't," she said, though her eyes dropped to his lips. "I know," he agreed, his thumb tracing her lower lip. "Tell me to stop." She definitely should. But the words wouldn't come. His phone rang suddenly, breaking the moment. James closed his eyes briefly before stepping away to answer it. "We'll continue tomorrow," he said after hanging up, his voice professional again, but his eyes still dark with wanting. Olivia nodded and hurried out, her skin still tingling where he had touched her. This was dangerous territory, she knew. But as the elevator doors closed, she realized she was already looking forward to tomorrow night. The next day passed in a blur of stolen glances and careful distance. In meetings, James was all business, but Olivia caught his eyes following her when he thought no one was looking. By evening, the office had emptied except for them. "I brought dinner," James said, entering her office with takeout bags. "Hope you like Thai." They spread the food across her desk, working as they ate. This time, the tension between them was impossible to ignore. Every accidental touch lingered, every shared look held questions neither dared to ask. "Tell me something about yourself," he said suddenly, leaning back in his chair. "Something I wouldn't know from work." Olivia set down her pen, surprised by the personal question. "Like what?" "Anything. Something real." She thought for a moment. "I wanted to be an artist before I went into marketing. I still paint sometimes when I can find the time." James looked genuinely interested. "What do you paint?" "Landscapes mostly, places I wish I could visit." She hesitated, then added, "What about you? Tell me something I wouldn't know." His eyes softened. "I hate being the boss sometimes. Everyone sees the title, not the person." Their conversation flowed easily after that, work temporarily forgotten. James told her about growing up with a demanding father who expected perfection. Olivia shared stories of her struggles to make it in the city. The distance between them seemed to shrink with each revelation. "It's getting late," she finally said, glancing at her watch. It was nearly midnight. James nodded, but neither moved to leave. The office was silent, the world outside dark and far away. It felt like they existed in their own private bubble. "Olivia," he said, his voice low. "About last night." A sharp knock interrupted them. They both turned to see Thomas from it standing at the door. "Sorry to disturb you," he said, eyes darting between them with obvious curiosity. "Security called. They need everyone out for the system check." "We'll be right there," James replied, his tone making it clear the conversation was over. After Thomas left, an awkward silence fell between them. "We should finish this tomorrow," James said, gathering the papers. "The proposal is almost done." Olivia nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. The moment had been broken, and his professional mask was back in place. They rode the elevator down together in silence. In the parking garage, James walked her to her car. "Thank you for staying late," he said formally. "Just doing my job," she replied, suddenly angry at the distance he had put between them again. As she reached for her car door, his hand caught her wrist. "Is that all it is to you, a job?" The touch of his fingers against her pulse sent heat racing through her body. "You tell me, James. One minute you're saying you want me, the next you're acting like nothing happened." "I shouldn't want you," he said, his voice rough. "It's inappropriate. It's complicated." Then stop playing games, she challenged, stepping closer instead of pulling away. Stop touching me when no one's watching. Stop looking at me like you can't decide whether to fire me or kiss me. His eyes darkened. Is that what you think I want to do? Fire you? I think you're afraid, she said boldly. Of what people will say. Of breaking your precious rules. In one swift movement, he pushed her gently against her car, his body close but not touching hers. You have no idea what I'm afraid of. The space between them crackled with tension. Olivia could feel the heat of him, smell his cologne mixed with the scent that was uniquely him. Then tell me, she whispered. I'm afraid that once I start, I won't be able to stop, he admitted, his voice barely audible. That I'll risk everything, my position, the company, your career, because I can't get you out of my head. His honesty took her breath away. Her anger melted, replaced by a longing so intense it scared her. James, she began, not sure what she was going to say. His phone rang again. He closed his eyes, frustration clear on his face. I have to take this, he said after checking the screen. We'll finish the proposal tomorrow. Your place, 7 o'clock. No interruptions this time. He stepped away, already answering the call as he walked to his car, leaving Olivia breathless and confused against her car door. Olivia spent the entire day distracted. 7 o'clock. Her place? No interruptions. The words played on repeat in her mind as she tried to focus on work. She left the office early, rushing home to clean her apartment, though she told herself they would only be working on the proposal. At 6:30, her roommate Kate poked her head into Olivia's bedroom. Why are you changing your outfit for the third time if this is just work? Olivia stopped, a fresh blouse halfway over her head. Is it that obvious? Kate laughed. You've got it bad from Mr. Demanding. It's complicated, Olivia sighed, settling on dark jeans and a soft blue sweater that brought out her eyes. His weakness, she had noticed. Just be careful, Kate warned. He's still your boss. At precisely 7, her doorbell rang. Kate gave her a knowing look before disappearing into her room. Olivia took a deep breath and opened the door. James stood there in casual clothes, jeans and a gray sweater that made him look younger, more approachable. He held a bottle of wine in one hand and work files in the other. You're exactly on time, she said, stepping aside to let him in. I'm always punctual for important meetings, he replied, his eyes taking in her apartment with interest. She led him to the living room where she had cleared the coffee table for their work. He set down the files but remained standing, looking at the paintings on her walls. Are these yours? He asked, moving closer to a small landscape of mountains at sunset. Olivia nodded, suddenly self-conscious. Just a hobby. They're beautiful. He turned to look at her, like the artist. The compliment hung in the air between them. Olivia felt her cheeks warm. Should we get started? She asked, gesturing to the files. James nodded, but before sitting down, he held up the wine. Do you mind? Not at all. In her small kitchen, she found wine glasses while he opened the bottle. The space felt intimate, their bodies close in the confined area. His fingers brushed hers as he handed her a glass, the contact sending electricity through her. To successful partnerships, he said, his eyes never leaving hers as they clinked glasses. They settled on her couch, spreading the papers between them. For an hour they worked diligently, the proposal taking shape. But with each passing minute, Olivia became more aware of his proximity, the scent of his cologne, the way his fingers moved across the pages. I think we're almost done, she said eventually, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. James nodded, setting aside his papers. Just one section left. But instead of continuing, he leaned back, watching her with those intense blue eyes. What? She asked, suddenly nervous under his gaze. I've been thinking about what you said last night, about me playing games. His voice was low, serious. You're right. I've been unfair to you. Olivia set down her pen. James. Let me finish, he said gently. I've been fighting this because I'm your boss, because I shouldn't want you this much, but I can't keep pretending. He moved closer, closing the distance between them on the couch. The question is, what do you want, Olivia? Her heart raced. What did she want? Her career was important. Office relationships were messy, complicated, but the pull between them was undeniable. She began, then stopped, gathering courage. I want you to be honest with me. Is this just attraction? Something to get out of your system? He reached for her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. What I feel for you goes beyond attraction. The way you challenge me, the way you think, your passion for your work. I've never met anyone like you. His sincerity was clear in his eyes. Olivia felt something shift inside her, a wall crumbling. And the company, my career? She asked. James sighed. That's the complicated part. I could transfer you to another department, but that feels like I'm hiding you away. Or, she prompted, or we keep this private until we figure out what it is, what we want it to be. The proposal lay forgotten between them as he moved closer still. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing across her lower lip. I'm tired of interruptions, he murmured, his eyes dropping to her mouth. I'm tired of pretending I don't want this. Olivia's breath caught as his face lowered toward hers. This was the moment, the point of no return. Your move, he whispered against her lips, leaving the final decision to her. Olivia hesitated for only a moment before closing the distance between them. Their lips met softly at first, tentative, testing. Then James's arms wrapped around her, pulling her closer as the kiss deepened. It was better than she had imagined, and she had imagined it many times. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, James rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since you walked into my office 2 years ago. 2 years is a long time to wait, she whispered, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. He smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. I'm a patient man when something matters. Their work lay forgotten as they talked late into the night, sharing kisses between confessions. James told her about his lonely climb to success, the pressure of running the company his father had built. Olivia shared her dreams beyond marketing, the places she wanted to visit, the life she hoped to build. It's almost midnight, she said eventually, noticing the time. James nodded but made no move to leave. His eyes held a question. Stay, she said softly, answering before he could ask. The next morning, Olivia woke to the unfamiliar weight of an arm around her waist and the steady rhythm of James's breathing against her neck. For a moment, she let herself enjoy the sensation before reality crept in. It was a workday. They would have to face the office, pretend nothing had changed. As if sensing her thoughts, James stirred behind her. Good morning, he murmured, pressing a kiss to her shoulder. Morning, she replied, turning in his arms to face him. His hair was tousled, his jaw darkened with stubble. He looked younger, more relaxed than she had ever seen him. Having regrets? He asked, studying her face. Trying to figure out what happens next, she admitted. He propped himself up on one elbow. What if I told you I have a plan? Olivia raised an eyebrow. Of course you do. You're James Wilson. You always have a plan. He laughed, pulling her closer. Don't mock the plan before you hear it. I'm listening. I'm going to restructure the marketing department, split it into 2 divisions. Emily has been ready for more responsibility for months, he explained. You'll lead creative, reporting directly to the board instead of me. Olivia sat up, surprised. You thought this through. All night, admitted. I want this, us, but not at the cost of your career or reputation. She touched his face gently. People will still talk. Let them, he said, covering her hand with his. As long as we know the truth, that this isn't about power or position, it's about us. And what are we exactly? She asked, suddenly vulnerable. James sat up fully, taking both her hands in his. I'm hoping we're the beginning of something real. Something that started with a demanded date but became a choice. Your choice. My choice. The sincerity in his eyes made her heart ache with unexpected happiness. Their moment was interrupted by the buzzing of James's phone. He sighed, reaching for it. The board meeting, he reminded her. Where I'll be presenting our restructuring plan. Olivia's eyes widened. Today? You're doing this today? He nodded, pulling her close for a quick kiss. No more waiting. No more pretending. 2 weeks later, Olivia settled into her new office. The glass walls offered a view of the creative team she now led. The restructuring had gone smoothly, with only knowing smiles from a few colleagues who had suspected there was something between her and James all along. A knock on her door made her look up. James stood there, professional as always in the office, though his eyes held a warmth reserved just for her. Ms. Rogers, do you have a moment? She gestured for him to enter. What can I do for you, Mr. Wilson? He closed the door behind him and handed her an envelope. a business proposal. Curious, she opened it to find 2 plane tickets to Paris and a note that simply said, "A real date this time. No demands, just a request. Will you join me?" Olivia smiled, remembering how this had all started with his demand for a date. Now here he was asking instead of demanding, his eyes hopeful as he waited for her answer. "Yes," she said, standing to meet him. "But this time I set the terms." His eyes darkened with interest. "And those are?" She stepped closer, her voice dropping low. "For starters, this won't be just business." His smile was all the answer she needed as he pulled her into his arms, the door to her new office safely closed behind them.